Glad to meet you.
I'm glad to meet you too.
I'm glad. I mean, I admittedly have been so far up my own ass with this book for the last 3 or 4 years, but I am just sort of like finding spaces where I'm like, I can't wait to read like this blog and I can't wait to watch this. Like, so I'm just glad to know of you now. It's really all of the connections that get made when you come out with a book are really special. So I'm glad
Oh,
that you're out there.
that's so nice. And I feel like I've gotten to know so many people. I mean, I used to be a big reader anyway, but not like this.
Yeah.
Now, like every memoir, every book I open, I get to know so much about people that our paths might not have crossed in life. And now look, it's like, I don't
Really
know, it's like
special.
magic. I love it.
It feels like a really special kind of time in that arena of like, I was just talking with someone, we were having like a little pre-interview and he happens to be a really good friend of mine. And we were just sort of, I don't know, just talking. And I said, one of the really great things about this has been making connections with other writers, because there have been so many women, writers who've written memoirs this year. And just like the ability to sort of, and they're all so different. Like Phyllis Grant is a really great example of, someone, we kind of came out with memoirs that are very parallel. And we've kind of both like, we've never met, but we've kind of looked at each other like, how have we, I mean, obviously we know we were both doing what you just did this morning, which is like juggling it all and creating this career and creating these lives for ourselves and our families. And we kind of all are like coming out of the woods at the same time, like, there you are. I knew you were out here. I was just too busy to find you. And now, we're telling similar stories, but in really different ways. It's really special. It's a really neat time.
It's awesome. I even earlier today, I did a podcast with an author, Alyssa Shalasky, who wrote a book called Apron Anxiety, and it intersperses recipes and stories. And then Phyllis Grant also has been on my podcast, and you,
Yeah.
and I'm like loving all these food memoir, like growing
Yeah.
up and experience. Anyway, it's just, if this were real life, I would say, let's all get together. I'm going to do an event with you guys, but
That would be great. I
someday.
really hope that we can put a pin in all of those things and really make them happen next year. Because it's just, I want this to not be sort of, it's been very nice and relaxing to be able to do this from, my desk and my bedroom. That's been kind of a nice sort of like energy restorative experience. Whereas the traveling, I used to travel a lot as a chef, and it really starts to take its toll on you when you're traveling 4 and 5 times a month, especially when you're flying. And so I was definitely getting a little threadbare in that way. But I really want next year to be sort of like, I'm trying to keep a little ledger of every time I say that or someone says that to me, like event with Zibby and Phyllis. And
Will you please put it in?
yeah.
I mean, we could do something now. I just feel like it's not as
No, it's
great,
not.
It's
It's
not the
not
same
nice.
as like when you get a group together. And I love
Yeah.
like pairing people who have so much to discuss. And
Yeah.
I don't know. So please
And when
write
you
it
feel
down.
like an energy in a room is so nice.
Yeah.
I'm really starting to miss that like zeitgeist of people talking together and
Yeah.
an audience listening. And admittedly, at the beginning of this, I was like, phew, I don't have to sit on a stage and talk about myself. And now I'm kind of like, but look at all these people that I can sit on the stage with and talk about what our work is going to be a great opportunity. So I'm keeping notes and trying to like remember all of the plans that we're dreaming of now and make them happen next year. So,
Well, put me at the top of the list. Once the floodgates have opened and we can all come rushing forward and planning stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, can't
Seriously,
wait.
ready for it.
Well, so tell me more about writing your book, and tell me about when you decided your life would be a book, and then how did you take everything that happened and put it on the page?
Well, it's cliche, I think, as it sounds. I think I'm one of those weird people that always was a writer. Like even when I was a kid, I'm just, that's how I process things. I'm just a writer. Whether I'm good or bad is to be determined. But like, that's how I process my experiences. And I have a really, you know, did I ever think I was going to write a memoir of this caliber as far as like personal exposure goes? No. Like not even close. What I think that there was a time in the world that changed and became available where I started to realize that I knew I was going to use, there are plenty of stories in my life that are great material for storytelling and that are good stories in and of themselves. I think in my head, I thought, well, that'll be for novel, that'll be for short stories, that'll be for screenplays, and that'll be for like my creative process later in life. I'll use all these interesting characters in different ways as a writer. And then, the world sort of changed. I left the restaurant industry and had a real significant experience, a personal experience with myself of the word is getting so overused, but a reckoning with myself of like the ways in which I tried to maneuver the world and the ways in which that was effective. And then also the ways in which I know it was damaging to me and other women around me, and the acquiescences that we make and the stories we don't tell, the stories we don't even share amongst ourselves as women, and how private and sort of shamefully secret a lot of these stories become for us as we move through the world, and really started to take apart what the parallels were between the acquiescences in sort of this very, patriarchal infrastructure, patriarchal and racist system out in the world that we all try to like ladder climb in, along with this sort of self-accountability of what I was doing to bring power to that world, by keeping these things so private and carrying all of these things as if it were some sort of, burden. My own life was a burden to the world, and the space that I was going to take up with my stories was burdensome for the world. And so, we get these ideas of the ways in which women are supposed to be accommodating. And I really started to get frustrated by the boundaries that I had to live in, because I was playing that game of not being burdensome to the world. And I wrote the essay about the restaurant industry, and it kind of got categorized as a sort of Me Too essay in the larger zeitgeist of the conversation that was happening at the time. And that was a moment for me where, like, not only did I realize that how good it felt to get all of that language out of me, the response was really interesting to me. How much people seemed to need to hear those small stories that were contained within that essay was a real awakening for me. And it was a real moment for me to realize that there's power in telling our stories. There's power in talking about sexual assault. There's, and at a time when, it takes 40 women to bring one man down in our culture, and that problem in our culture and society rests solely on the fact that we acquiesce and keep these stories to ourselves for so long. And, there's no space for us to have the conversations about rape and abortion and about what it means to be a woman in all the ways, beautiful ways, connective ways. Like, so, it just felt like a really great opportunity to finally share what was a very true experience for one woman in the world. And I think the more we can start kind of opening up those spaces, I think that's how we can create a societal change about how we treat women in this country, So, I didn't realize I was going to ever write a memoir in this capacity, but it happened. And so here we are. And I look really forward to writing, some fiction and some things that are a little less making me feel completely exposed to the world. There's that level of it too, of like, I do understand for me why this was important, but it's also difficult to lay it all out there bare.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I mean, that's like, some of the scenes I was just like, oh my gosh, Lisa, I can't believe it. The one with your ex and the baby on the bed. And I won't go into it, but oh my heart was breaking for you. And then the way that his mother even handled your relationship after, and just all of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, anyway.
And it's and the trick, I think, of those kinds of stories is how frequent and common they are for people, women out in the world, and how I think here I was sort of this figure of note in my arena, in my industry, and viewed as someone who was no nonsense and strong and independent and hardworking and created my own, all of this sort of strong, independent woman tropes surrounded me. And I thought it's really kind of messed up that no one truly understands how a strong woman is built. Mm-hmm. They think that we just appear and that I really wanted to give some language to what creates and builds these strong women out in the world. It's oftentimes, in fact, probably never ease and, because they just plowed their way through. No, there was definitely something to build that strength and that power and that ability to manage greater circumstances that I think people just assume you were born with, It's like,
well, it's like people working out in the gym. I'm like envisioning this like muscle man type of weight area of a gym. Like you can walk in, people have different baselines, right? But you have to go through the pain of lifting for anybody to get stronger, right? So right. You can be relatively strong, but in order to really get strong, you have to put in some sort of, tissue breaking hard work. And for emotional strength, it's exactly the same. Yeah, it has to come out of somewhere. You have to break something down to build it back up again. So
yeah, totally.
But I wish it hadn't have happened to you that way, and and all the rest. But I have to say, when I started reading your book, your table of contents and the way that you structured each chapter, the title and the accompanying like food was so brilliant that I like took a picture of that page, and I have been meaning to post it, but of course I haven't remembered to do so. But I love like I get such a kick out of well-structured and creative, clever formats. So I really loved how you did that.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if I was going to have chapter titles, and then it just sort of started happening really naturally, where I was, each chapter sort of became an essay in and of itself, and the two words that had each chapter sort of became for me almost like an outline, and it kind of just helped me stay on both a thematic sort of structure as well as like a feeling of that time, and so I'm glad you said that. Thank you, because it just sort of came about naturally, and I was like, well, I'll just keep it.
I loved it. When you were writing, like, take me through the writing process. Like, now you had these titles. Did you have a list of all of them first, and then you filled it in, or as each one came? And like, what was the writing process like? Like, were you sitting right there, or where did you write all this? And
this is where I did it all, and sometimes like on the ground in a puddle.
No.
The writing process was, it's the first time I've ever done anything this big. I've written a lot of essays and I've written a lot of larger format sort of things, but I've never written a book. Obviously, it's my first book. It was an interesting process because I had to learn to be messy, and that's not something I'm good at. I'm not good at, I am messy in my creative efforts, but I oftentimes don't share that and the part that was so hard about the writing process for me was presenting disastrous work to my editor so that we could work out of it, and that, so I spent a lot of time in those early months of starting this book being really like cloistered in my and really trying to edit myself before I gave it to my editor. And it took me some time. And that's just a result, I'm pretty sure, of working in a pretty high stress kitchen, being a pastry chef. Like, my standards for what I'm willing to present are very high, and like I hold myself to a very high sort of uh, standard when I'm engaging with another professional. So like in a kitchen, for example, you work on, if you're the pastry chef, if you're a cook or a sous chef, it's a little different. But as the pastry chef, as the chef of my department, I would get ideas and I would do all of that messy work very privately, and I would like figure it out and do the math and make all the equations work. And then when I had something that felt as close to finished as possible, that's when I would say, hey, I need you guys to taste this. It's going on the menu soon. And then I would take notes, and then I would, tweak and do that kind of stuff. And I think I went into this book with that idea of like, I have to get this right before I show it to her. So it took me some time to get out of that training that my brain was used to. And once she brought me closer and she was like, you just gotta brain dump. So there was a lot of stories that just came out, and I just let them come out. And then we found our structure from there, of like, look, what's our overall conversation here? And for me, it was really important to make sure that the conversation was significantly and nearly entirely about how women engage and find and love and care for each other, and all of the complexities of that. And I'm really intrigued by the ways in which women move around this world together. There feels like it feels like we are all part of sort of this, it makes me think of what's in the ocean, the channel that kind of moves through the Gulf Coast, the Gulf Stream, right? It kind of feels like we all have this similar movement around this world, and we all are tethered to this way of experiencing and communicating, and there's something really powerful about that. And there's also something very painful about that because of these shared experiences and traumas and things that we experience as women that, frankly, men, I think can understand on some level. It's not like men do not experience trauma, but I think women have very different experiences in the world, and we're tethered together in all of these ways. And so that to me was like, I really wanted to talk about the complexities in which women move through this world together and alone. And so everything sort of became, is it useful to have this, is this story useful to that bigger picture of sort of talking about the complexities of how women engage with one another, and also what I'm hoping to sort of pass to my own daughter, and how I'm hoping to sort of leave her with less of all of this sort of generational undoing and unlearning. I think that is a huge priority for me, and that was a huge priority for the book. So also just sort of keeping to those themes. And then I think structurally what happened was I just started taking each chapter like it was its own short story or short essay, like its own essay. So then, after we sort of compartmentalized it that way, we started to sort of do a little bit of weaving so that they didn't feel so chopped, like it didn't feel like hopefully like a short story collection. Like what we wanted was to sort of weave them together. So there were some, it was an evolution of how we could best get all of these things to sort of work as a whole. And it was a really beautiful experience. And I have two editors, and they're both women. And it was just this really special, really, truly wonderful experience. It's been Penguin Press has been one of, I think, the most remarkable experiences of my life. And I hope I can write for them forever. It's a really, really special house, and I'm very proud to be one of their writers. They have taken such good care of this book. I can't even tell you. It's amazing to me.
I'm so glad. That's wonderful. So has your daughter read this
Yeah.
book?
Parts. She's 15. She'll be 16 in a few weeks. She, I think she's picking it up and putting it down, picking it up and putting it down. And, I think they're nervous. Both of my kids are a little nervous. My son is 20 and he's like, Mom, I love you. And we had a lot of talks before as I was sort of writing these stories just about like his comfort level and what he was comfortable with me sharing. Because it's for a while, it was mine and his experience, and he's like, no, I don't feel like that was my experience. I feel like this is wholly your experience. You worked really hard to make this not a thing I even have to recall. So like, I feel so incredibly far removed from any of these stories. So he was fully supportive, but he's also not quite ready to read the book. He's like, I think there are just some things I'm not ready to know yet. And so I'm like, that is totally fair. And Maggie has, read, I don't think she's read it all the way through, but she's cherry picked some chapters. So, and I actually don't think she's made it to the last chapter, which is interesting because that's the part that like, when my husband read it, he just was, sobbing and he's like, I can't wait I'm going to cry. But he was like, this is such a gift for her. And it's going to be something that she keeps, she can revisit her whole life. Like it exists forever now. And she can look at this when she's 70 and know like, this was something you felt when she was growing up, and it's like the best gift. And I was like, oh my God. Because you don't really think about that, you're not really thinking about your audience. And so there was a lot of like retroactive, if you think about your audience too much, you'll never write the book. You'll never you'll just be obsessed with like who's going to think what of who what, and you're gonna, and as much as I tried to, it was really important to me to not blame anybody or indict anyone, even people that deserved blaming and indictment. It was really important for me for this to be about my own work, my own internalized undoing and unlearning, and really taking some things apart that, yes, I can assign blame to. I think my grandfather takes the biggest hit here, but it was really important to me to make this about what I learned and how I moved forward from these experiences and why, yeah, I hope that the messaging kind of makes its way with ease, but there's always more time to write books, hopefully.
Are you already thinking about your next book?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? Memoir, fiction?
No. One memoir is enough. I mean, maybe if I can, that I shouldn't say that. The next memoir doesn't have to be, quite so guttural. It can be a little, when I think about Ruth Reichel and Nora Ephron, sort of, I think everything will always be a little obviously reflective of my own life. And I think that I value that so much in how women tell stories. And, I have plenty of material to use. I'm working on some other projects that are not nonfiction. So it's exciting for me to sort of take these stories and have a little bit more freedom, because there's some, lots of rules with memoir. You have to really hold yourself accountable you hold yourself accountable hopefully as a writer anyway, but you're holding yourself accountable to truth and fact and data, and you worry about, am I getting this right? Am I remembering? I was talking with Dave Chang on his podcast last week, and he he wrote a beautiful memoir and he sent it to his sister, and his sister like emails him saying, David, I love you. I don't remember it this way at all, but I'm glad that you had a space to write it. And there's that experience of, you know, what truth lives in each experience for each individual. And so you're sort of faced with that reality of like, everyone's having their own personal moment that is very different than the person standing next to you. And so, you know, memoir keeps you in these really rigid, you know, boundaries of making sure you're holding accountability to truth. Whereas if you're doing nonfiction, you have a lot more freedom and you get to, you know, you get to play a little bit more. But it was a good first exercise, and I, you know, eventually maybe I'll write more memoir. I would love that. And you know, I've gotten all the hard stuff out of the way, hopefully, knock on wood. You know, so, but right now it feels really good to be in a space where the creative part of my brain really gets to play and create character profiles, and it's fun, you know.
And what is your relationship like these days to baking and chefdom and creating and cooking and all of that?
Oh, you know, it's always going to be my first love, you know. I mean, writing is so much a part of who I am that it doesn't even feel like a vocation or a hobby. Like it feels so much a part of, again, just sort of how I process and move through the world. And baking has, I think, really truly one of the first like vocations and crafts and tactile work that I fell so in love with, that like I recognize in my husband. Like he's a ceramicist, and like his affinity and his education and his passion for the material is so familiar to me, and the way that baking feels for me. It will always be in that. It will always be that for me. I will always have a very deep, visceral response and connectivity to baking. You know, the food world is in a hard place right now, in a great place in some ways. They're having really important conversations about food justice, and all of these things are incredibly important and timely and necessary. And I'm not to say like I'm piecing out because it's getting hard. That's not what I'm saying. I just I feel like it's a good time to, I don't know, let some younger people have the space in that world, you know. And there's a lot of really great energy happening from like the 20 to 35-year-olds coming up, and they've got a lot to say. And I am so happy to sit and hear what they are bringing to the table. And I don't know that you ever age out of a conversation like that, but I am also self-aware enough to know that I'm learning a lot from these younger writers in the food space. And this quarantine has been a really great opportunity to like chill out and listen and read and learn, you know. And some of it I'm really excited about, and some of it, you know, is I think is still needs some work, you know. So but you know, I am really glad to be in a space where I have where I've kind of earned the opportunity to do work in a different way, you know. You know, I was always out in the streets. I was always, you know, front line of the hard conversations, and I'm not scared of those things, but I'm also sort of getting to an age now where I want to do something that's a little bit more dedicated to something that builds and cultivates, and even in a really private way, you know. And I'm getting really comfortable with wholly being a writer, not a chef writer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think it's been a real joy and partially a relief to hear people say this shouldn't even be in a food memoir category. This is just a, you know, it's hard to even call you a chef now because your writing, you know, seems to be so much your focus. And that's been really nice to hear, because that's sort of been my goal, is to, you know, you can't cook in a kitchen forever. And I never made sense with the banks or the investors of how to open my own space. And this time I'm really glad, that I'm not saddled with trying to, I have so many of my best friends are trying to keep things, from just completely falling apart, right now. And it's a really hard time to be a chef and a restaurateur. And so, I think this time has really given me this lockdown, this quarantine time has just given, I think, a lot of people the space to really refocus, like what their intentions might have been before life kind of carried them away, and I feel like I'm in that space. And, I don't think I ever would have given myself permission to stop cooking as a private chef or doing consulting or developing recipes unless the world had sort of made me stop.
Yep.
And just this little amount of time away from my perpetual insecurity of like not losing potential income. Like I will never have that. And that this time's even turned like that on its head, where you realize we don't need as much as we thought, we actually need a lot less than we're working so hard for. And if the trade-off is, getting to work in my yards, 10 hours a week, or getting to go on long walks with my husband, or cuddling up with the dog for an hour a day, like, okay, I'm down. Like, that's a good trade. Do it. So yeah, I think my relationship to the food world is one that will always exist. But I definitely can actively say I'm working hard so that I can just write full time. And again, like I'll probably always write about food in some way, or my experiences as a chef, because I think that's the well from which I draw my writing material. But I want it to transcend sort of this food media conversation. I'm growing less interested in that and more interested in making something beautiful out of the same kinds of conversations, and sort of making more cultural experiences for people than hard-nosed, like, fuck it all, that's starting to feel less useful to me than it once did,
Yeah.
So.
Aw. Well, Lisa, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thank you for sharing all of your amazing thoughts. I feel like I could listen. You have such like a soothing, like centered voice. And I feel like I could just sit here and listen to you forever. So I don't know, maybe a podcast is in your future. I feel like you should take it on the road, that could be really fun for you.
The world is all of our oysters now. We just can make
right?
what we want happen.
Whatever you
Why
want.
not?
Why not? Well, have a great day. And it was so nice to talk to you. And please keep our event on the top of your list. I will. We will do it. And now it'll be like one of my post-quarantine goals. So, all right.
Well, good. Well, take care of yourself.
Thank you. You too.
Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.